Hi, my name is Russell Mullenberg, and this is Eat This Word. It's a weekly program where I serve up bite-sized bits of Bible. And the bite-sized bit of Bible that we're looking at, working on, is Psalm 139, verse 1. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. This is the first verse of what I call the God Knows Me Psalm. This is a psalm where David celebrates this idea that God knows everything there is to know about him. He meditates on this wonderful idea that God sees him, God knows him. And so this is part 2 of what's going to be a 4-week series on this psalm. And I mentioned last week the structure of Psalm 139 is 6 verses, 4 stanzas of 6 verses each. So last week we talked about God, you know me. This week we're going to talk, God, you are with me. David reflects on this wonderful notion that no matter where he goes, God will be there and with him as well. And then we'll have a couple more weeks after this also. So, God, you're with me, verses 7 through 12. We'll look at the first 4 verses. David does a sort of thought experiment. He's not trying to get away from God. So don't think that where he talks about fleeing from God's presence. It's not that he wants to get away from God, but he's trying to imagine that if he did want to get away from God, where would he go? Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you're there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there, your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. So this is the thing that just has captured David's attention. And he's marveling at this idea that if he wanted to get away from God, there's nowhere he could go. And he expresses that by creating some extremes, some opposites here. So verse 8, if I go up to the heavens, as high as I can go, up to the very top of the atmosphere, I go to the depths, to the lowest part of the ocean, the earth, the deepest trench, still, God, he'd be there. You get in a rocket and you launch yourself into orbit, God's still there. You get a submarine, you go to the deepest part of the ocean, you haven't escaped God's presence. Or verse 9, again, opposites. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, the sun rises in the east, dawn is in the east, so that's what he's talking about there. If I go as far east as I can, if I could go until I met the rising sun, or if I settle on the far side of the sea. For Israel, the sea is to the west. And so he says, if I get in a boat like Christopher Columbus and I sail as far as I can possibly sail, even there, God would be there. East, west does not separate us from God. Heights nor depths does not separate us from God. And so David marvels at this notion. Now, an interesting the word, last week we talked about omniscience, so the doctrine here is omnipresence. That no matter where you go, God is there, that there is no place. God is not limited by spatial considerations. Omni means all, so omniscience means God knows all things. Omnipresence means God is in all places. He is everywhere. There's nowhere we can go where we would be separated from God. An interesting thing about the verses we just looked at, verse 8 specifically, it's translated as if I make my bed in the depths, but the Hebrew word there, the original Hebrew word, is the Hebrew word Sheol. Some English translations will actually leave that untranslated as Sheol. And the contrast here, the parallel is, if we're talking about heavens, Sheol would be sort of a parallel to hell. For the Hebrews, Sheol was the place of the dead, the underground. So when this word gets translated into Greek, when they write the Greek version of the Old Testament, they use the word Hades, which is the Greek place, mythological place of the dead. And so Sheol, Hades, hell, we would, in Christian doctrine, we define hell as the absence of God's blessing. Or sometimes we'll even say, the thing that makes hell is that God isn't there. And yet here, verse 8, we see this idea. David says, even if I went to Sheol, even if I went to the depths of to the dead, even there he would not be able to escape God. So we need to think about that a little bit. For us, hell, sometimes we will think of hell as enemy territory, like it's under control of the devil, and so maybe there's some sort of boundary there that God is not allowed to enter. But the idea here is that God is sovereign everywhere. That just because hell is a place where of punishment, where those who refuse to acknowledge him will be sent, where he is going to withhold his blessing, does not mean that, if in David's thought experiment, if he could find a way to run from God, that he'd run to this theoretical enemy camp that is Sheol. Even there, if God wants to find him, God will find him. Even there, he has not escaped God's sovereign control over the universe. And so when we talk about the omnipresence of God, we're talking about his presence everywhere. He chooses not to bless those in hell, but he's still sovereign over hell. So then the +2 verses 11 and 12 kind of take this theme to its into hyperdrive. I talked about that last week. 4 verses, then +2. David says, even if I would say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you, O God. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. David says even if he could find the darkest night and wrap himself in it like a blanket, if God wishes to find him there, God will find him. Darkness becomes like light in the presence of God. So what are we to make of this? What are we to make of the doctrine of God's omnipresence? Remember, this is a psalm about how God knows us. In one sense, it can seem a little intimidating. Sort of eye in the sky, right? Be careful what you do because Jesus is always watching you. This idea that there's nowhere you can go. So even when you think there's no one else around, no one to see, that still God sees what you're up to, what he's doing. It can be intimidating, even threatening. But David doesn't see it that way. David's writing this psalm not to warn us to be careful because God's always watching. He's writing this psalm to invite us to celebrate that God is always with us, that God knows us deeply, intimately, that we're never out of God's watchful care. To me, the idea is that, again, if we were to try to run from God, say play a game of hide and seek with God. I don't know about you. I'm sure we've all played hide and seek at one time or another. I wonder if you've ever played hide and seek where you found a particularly good hiding place and you were hidden and it took a while to find you, so much so that the seeker eventually gave up. Right? That's got to be one of the worst things that can happen on the playground, is that you do so well at hiding that the person who's supposed to find you just stops searching. They quit. They go get a snack. They go swing on the swing set, but nobody tells you. And you're still hiding, you're still waiting for them to find you. And that can feel very uncaring, unloving, this idea that you've been left out there on your own. And that idea, I think, is what David is saying. If you play hide and seek with God, he's never going to stop searching for you. Of course, he's never going to lose you in the first place, but we think we're running from God. We think we're hiding from God. We think we're going to get away from God. He's never going to stop searching for you. Jesus told some stories about that. In Luke chapter 15, he talks about the sheep that gets lost and the shepherd who goes to find it. He talks about the coin that gets lost and the lady who sweeps her floor till she turns that coin up. Jesus talks about the father who loses a son, but never stops searching the highway, never stops looking out from his front porch, waiting for his son to come home. Luke 19, Jesus says, the Son of God came to seek and to save the lost. That's what I take from the omnipresence of Jesus. Of course, I can never be outside of his presence, but even if I am trying to hide from him, even if I am trying to run from him, God will never stop looking for me. He's good at hide and seek, and he will find me.